Oh boy, here we go.
And we are live.
Very good.
Very good. Live. And today, we're going to be talking about how to ask for what you want and how to get what you want. Very good.
That's great. Yeah, okay. Very good. I like that little...
Covering all the basics.
Dun, dun. Oh boy. Are we doing the little dance already?
Oh, we are. I just dropped it now. So, I mean, we can dance now. We can always dance now.
Dun, 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 dun.
Okay, awesome.
No more coffee cups. No more coffee cups.
No more floating coffee cups. No, they were good while they lasted.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, we're talking about getting what you want, asking what you want, and negotiating for what you want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think this is definitely in your field of expertise. You tend to be a lot more bold and fearless in that domain than I am. I tend to be a little more hesitant, and it's definitely an area that I need to work on.
Yeah. I think, well, you say bold, but I would say it's a little more reckless half the time. I just very unconventional. I just don't think, I heard this phrase when I was, I don't remember, in my teens or something like that. And it just said, well, I mean, it's similar to the lines of, life's what you make of it. And you can have anything in your life, but you got to ask for it. And, that kind of stuck with me. And another one was everything is negotiable. Because that's sort of true, right? Like everything is technically negotiated. Everything is a constructed socially. Parties have to agree. And at the end of the day, if you want something, you got to ask for it, negotiate for it. And, this is very appropriate in every domain, in social life, in romantic relationships, obviously in business. I mean, it does not get more obvious in business when you're negotiating for a salary or contracts. And that always stuck with me. And so I always take the outlook that, whatever you're up to, you could negotiate it. You could have a conversation. You could push for things, and you don't have to take the default as whatever's given to you. You don't have to take that. That's only the starting offer, in life or in a business contract or situation. Right.
Yeah, I think that's a really useful mindset to have. And I think the differences in how you and I, the differences in our backgrounds, I think. I don't know, maybe sort of explain or they make sense, where I feel like you have a less traditional background than I do. Like I was very much like a goody two shoes kind of kid. I was really like serious about school and really steeped in academia, and there's like some rule breaking, like in college, there's a little bit of rule breaking, but when it comes to your schoolwork, there's no negotiating that. You just you have to do your work and you have to follow the rules, and that's it. And so it's been a big barrier for me to think, because I know when you say that everything is negotiable and that, you have to ask for things. Like if you want it, you have to ask for it. Like all these things you're saying, I know them, but it's still hard for me to, I guess, put them into practice or really to really like practice them and to use the things that I know, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. And I think you say unconventional, but I come from a sales background, and I really feel like in sales, you're always, negotiating, always asking, always pushing. And I think it's like one of, sales is like sort of a very universal job in the sense that, it really trains that and inculcates in you a sense of, hey, constantly, push for a sale, ask for it. You don't have to be pushy, but you do have to ask for the sale. And you do have to get beyond that awkwardness, get beyond yourself, and get beyond, being uncomfortable and negotiate. So I do want to start. I'll give you a little vignette situation that on my first, not my first job, but a job that I went in that was a sales gig, and I remember it was I was competing with, I think, a couple other people that they weren't much less senior than me, but they were at a college, and I wasn't. I was doing something else before. But what I came in is I wasn't gonna take a commission only position, meaning I was going to come in there, I was going to get a salary and the commission. And I basically negotiated from the start a pretty decent package that when I compared it to the rest of the people that were working doing the same job as me, it ended up being that I negotiated a percentage of a commission much higher than they did. It was about double, I think. And I also negotiated a salary that was much higher. They weren't on a salary, which is, which really sucks for them, because they got to really have pushed for it. And what's interesting is it was a short-term gig. I moved up in the company, but the lesson there was that within the short-term gig, it's interesting that I brought in the biggest client that company had that year, because I sort of came in, built an expectation of like, hey, I'm here to do this. I'm here to be, the best salesperson you're going to have. And I deserve to be well compensated for it. And they ended up bringing in, pretty sizable contract and getting a nice chunk of it, like getting a nice commission at the end of the day. And I was, that was something that I think a lot of people told me, hey, you can't do that, and who are you to do that? And I just never took that as a given. I was like, oh, you know what? No, how about no? How about I'm not going to work for free, and my commission needs to be higher. And that was great, and it worked out. And then I went on later in the company and did pretty well for myself. So I was very proud, and didn't take the situation as just a given, Right. I was just like, this is the beginning negotiation. That's their opening bid. Let's take it a little higher.
Right. That's the whole mindset. It's like, that's why mindset is so important in so many different ways, is because if you have the mindset of, well, this is what they told me, so, this is just what I'm going to have to deal with, take it or leave it, then you're limiting yourself. You're starting off already limited. But if you have the mindset of, okay, this is what they've told me, but there's room for negotiation. This is where everything starts, and we'll see how things go from here and see if it can grow from there. Then there's, maybe it doesn't work out. Maybe it doesn't get any bigger or higher than what was offered to you, but there's still the possibility it could, and you're never going to know if you don't push for it, or if you don't ask.
Yeah. The chances of you getting what you want go up exponentially if you're asking for it, because you're going to be clear, direct, and the more bolder and more powerful your ask is. Sometimes it doesn't have to be bold, but you do have to ask.
Right.
The Wayne Gretzky quote, right? You missed 100% of the shots you don't take.
Exactly. And I can't remember the guy's name that you had me listen to.
Alan Palmer.
Thank you. Yes, he talks about because one of the recording that I was listening to, he was at a conference, and it was with a bunch of professionals, and they were mainly talking about raises and asking for a raise in your salary. And he was saying that, you want it to be fairly concise, direct, and polite. So you don't have to go in and demand, I want a $100,000 raise and just be obnoxious about it. It's like, you can be very polite. You don't have to be super aggressive. But you still need to ask for what it is that you're looking for. And he says too that you need to be very direct. There's no beating around the bush.
Right. I want to speak to that directness. One time I was negotiating a sales contract, like a clause in a sales contract, where basically if I left the company, that the commissions were paid out at certain times, and basically if I wasn't present at the company, I forfeit my commissions. And I remember that was a uncomfortable situation to say to my boss at the time, to say, hey, you know what, that's I'm not comfortable with that clause. But I think that clause saved me, tens of thousands of dollars. Because what I did is I said, hey, can we take that out? Let's put that out. Talk to your people and in HR and take that out. We don't need that. and I remember that was very uncomfortable. I also thought it's just kind of unreasonable. And I think most people would take something that is given to them and just accept it as, oh, this belongs here. This is what it, this is okay. This is what I'm going to take. I can't just ask for something. And I just didn't do that. I was like, hey, you know what? This doesn't work for me. And the thing to remember is that there's something you want and there's something the other person wants also, right? They want you to be doing a good job, whatever it is. If it's in a romantic relationship or a friendship, they want something out of the relationship too, out of the interaction too. And so you're always negotiating what it is you're settling for, what it is you're offering, and what they are offering, and it doesn't make sense. And so that just didn't make sense to me. I was saying hey, you know what? This doesn't make sense to me. I don't want to, show up and be enthusiastic about this if, something happens and I don't get my commissions. I'm not going to forfeit them, just voluntarily. And so I just said to him, and I think, just that plus a lot of other things, as I mentioned before, the other employees just didn't feel comfortable doing that. And, at the same time, that also impacted their performance because even though they were in the same role as me, they weren't as motivated as me to perform, right, because they didn't negotiate a better deal. So it wasn't as, invigorating for them to show up and do the job really well, which gives more motivation to me because I was motivated properly. And I made a decision to myself, this is what I need to perform really well. And it worked out. Yeah.
Do you remember the exact wording or maybe close to the exact wording that you used when asking about the not forfeiting your commissions if you aren't present in the company?
No, I don't think I remember. But I mean, it was something to similar. It was something along the lines of, this really. I was reading the contract, and there's this one. It looks great. I always put a positive thing because most of it did work out. It was looking good. But I said, hey, you know what? What can we do about this, because this doesn't work for me. And I gave a couple of reasons. One was, I gave a hypothetical of me getting hit, being hospitalized and not able to work or something like that. Why would I be arbitrarily punished for work I already, did and earned money for, or let's say something happens and I can't, why should I be punished? How can we make this fair? And it was in the best interest of my my boss to do that, and he did.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I like that hypothetical example because it's not like, because I imagine that when the boss is coming up with that kind of contract or term, he's imagining that, or she is imagining that you're leaving
right
the company. Whereas you're saying, no, I'm not necessarily, it's not, if I'm not here, it's not because I'm quitting. It's what if something were to happen? And yeah, I think that's very legitimate.
Yeah, and also you want to make it like a relationship. It's a takes two to tango, because I'm saying, hey, this is what I need. I need to come in and crush this, and I need your help to help you, with bringing in the most amount of sales. So I made it in both interest of both of us, in the interest of both of us, right? It wasn't just me being, being petty and selfish. It was me getting my needs met so that we can do better work together. And it turned out great. Right.
And that's Alan Palmer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So he also talks about especially when you're talking to a boss or somebody who, if there's like a hierarchy, is, higher up than you, he always talks about one of the important things to keep in mind is to treat the other person as your equal. Like, you are just as deserving to be there as your boss is. And once you put the two of you on an equal playing field, then they're going to be a lot more receptive to you. They're going to show you a lot more respect. And it'll help you feel, if you view your boss as an equal rather than, your boss high up on a totem pole, then you're going to feel a lot more comfortable negotiating with them as well.
Right. Because if you put yourself at a lower dynamic, you take a deferential position that isn't, one, they need you also. There's a reason you're there. There is something they need from you. And so obviously back to that, it takes two to tango.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so, and it's not adversarial at that point.
Right. Yeah, and it doesn't have to be adversarial. It can just, it can be a perfectly pleasant conversation.
100%.
When negotiating. The formula that Alan Palmer was using was, being pretty concise, polite, and direct. And he would say something like, hey, so-and-so, hey, boss, I came here because I wanted to talk about X. Or he said, no, what he said, because the way that he framed and worded everything was very precise, and it seemed like everything he said had a purpose or was supposed to serve a purpose. And so he said that it was hey, I wanted to talk today because I had, my goal by the end of this conversation is for us to, agree upon X, or, and I think the example he said was, I'm looking for us to agree upon a 10% raise, and a 10% raise for me, and to have it in writing by the end of the week.
Right.
And then he would open it up and say, how do you feel about that? Or what are your thoughts on that? He always talked about how it's very important to not leave it as a yes or no question, but to make it very open-ended.
Mm-hmm.
And for that, it was because a yes or no is too easy for the person to just say no and end it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you say something like, how do you feel about that? They could still reject the ask, but it's going to take a lot more effort for them to do it. And it opens the conversation up rather than just shutting it down by saying no.
Right, creating a decision fork, right? Yeah, that, and the other thing he does really well is, setting the intention and being direct and honest. I think that was the other thing he talked about, right? Like being direct and honest and not keeping things in your head and waiting to spring something on them, but just telling them up front and softly, but still directly, that this is why you're here, and here's my intention. Here's what I wish that we could come to an agreement about.
Right, and it's important to be direct, because he said it could go one of either two ways if you're not direct. One is either they know what you're going to say, but you're not saying it, so it's making them very distrusting of you because you seem sort of like, you're trying to hide something from them, or they don't know what you're going to say, and it puts them on guard and in like a defensive position, because they will then get the feeling that you're trying to get them to do something they don't want to do. And so, they're just sort of like poised to reject whatever it is that you're going to have to say. But if you just put it out directly, then there is no ambiguity. There is no, are they going to say it? Or are they not? And it makes it very easy for them to, if maybe they thought it was going to be way worse than what you're actually saying. And so therefore it's going to be a huge relief. And if it's exactly what they thought you were going to say, then at least it's out there and you're being honest and upfront with them. Right.
I wanted to take it into a different direction. I was going to say that, every big win in your life is also going to be coming out of, most of the time, a conversation and an ask. And that's why it's so important to push these things in, let's say, a romantic, setting.
Mm-hmm.
If I didn't talk to you the first time we met,
mm-hmm.
we wouldn't have met, right? And that was also a conversation that had to be started, and then a series of conversations that, like, hey, texts and calls and everything mm-hmm. like that, right? It's always a conversation, and I mean, there was a ton of other failed asks from other partners, ex-girlfriends, and all that, because all those conversations also, they didn't go, and they didn't need to go further. But the big wins in your life are going to come from, having conversations, having asks from people, and then, you end up having great life with a bunch of awesome people.
That's right. That's right.
Right. So in romantic relationships, it's also the same thing. You just got to constantly, directly ask for what you want.
Yeah, and you can even approach them in the same sort of manner as we were talking about before, where it's like, if you want to introduce yourself to somebody, or rather than just saying, hey, can I buy you a drink? Because that makes it easy to say, no, I'm good, thanks. It's like opening up a conversation with them. You want to make sure that you view this person who you're approaching as your equal, and that, it's a negotiation. Things are open to figure out and to have a conversation about. And so you can say something like, hey, I was seeing you over there. It took me a lot of... Oh, another thing that he said too, sorry. But one of the things that Alan Palmer was saying was that it's important to be honest about how you're feeling as well. And so if you're feeling nervous about something, he said it's okay to tell that person that you're nervous. So it's like if you're trying to ask somebody out or hit on them or whatever, you can say, hey, I saw you from across the room and it took a lot of courage for me to... Or it took a lot for me to sort of work up the courage to come over here. I'd love to buy you a drink. How do you feel about that?
Right.
And there you go.
Opens it up.
Yeah. And, they can still say no, but again, it's sort of, it primes them to think a little more deeply about the situation rather than an instant shutdown.
Right. Yeah, I like the opening up bit. I like the idea of, hey, how do you feel about that? You know, because then you could just say something, and then instead of leaving it, you ask them, hey, how do you feel about that? You know, and that I really like that framing, because it's it just gets a conversation going.
Right, exactly. And that's the whole point, is you want a conversation to be going, because as long as there's a conversation going, then there's going to be room to shift one way or another. Yeah.
The other thing that I wanted to mention when asking for these things is that can come up in not having a person not ask for them is, one, not having high self-esteem, not feeling good about yourself, not feeling like you're worthy of the ask, you know, like you don't deserve this thing.
Yeah.
And I was reading, was actually listening to a book, The Aladdin Factor by Jack Canfield. I can't remember the other author, but regardless, it's all about asking. I'm going to do a book review later on it. And he talks about how, you know, there's all these things that we have that impede us from asking for what we want. And a lot of the times they come from poor self-esteem, or, you know, kind of silly story you told yourself when you were a kid, the way you grew up. Maybe your parents told you, like, hey, you can't have that. And it kind of left a bad impression on you, and you're just carrying that. And the author shared one silly one where he just talked about how basically he went to some seminar and they were giving out different color notebooks. And this is like an established author, you know, like a millionaire. And they were giving out different notebooks, and he got one colored notebook and he wanted the yellow notebook. And the seminar leader just basically said, like, hey, if you're not happy with, you know, your notebook, remember, you could always switch them. And he's just like, oh man, I never even thought that I could just ask for, you know, a different color notebook. And he just asked somebody next to him. He's like, hey, I really like your yellow notebook. Can I have it? And the guy's just like, yeah, sure. I don't even like yellow. And so, like, all these hang-ups, you know, like, they are drifting with momentum through our life. And it's so, you know, we're always evolving. It's good to just kind of work on the self-esteem, because that'll make you a better person when you do ask, that you could do it softly, you know, more properly.
Right, because a big part of when it comes to negotiating or failing to negotiate is what's going through our own minds, you know, the internal process. And if I feel like I don't deserve to get that raise, or to ask that person out, like, oh, you know, they'd never be into me anyways, so there's no point in asking, then again, I'm limiting myself. I'm not going to do anything about it, because I'm already just like putting myself down and shutting myself down. So you have to work on your self-esteem, and you have to work on feeling and believing that you deserve this thing that you're asking for, so that it doesn't feel like such an insurmountable, scary request.
Yeah. Yep. Did you have anything else you wanted to cover?
No, I don't think so. I think that's good for me for now. Oh, but one thing that I would like to add is everybody subscribe. Boom. Yeah.
You gotta ask for that.
Yeah. You gotta ask if you want to receive.
Yeah, you know, I'm not happy. It's kind of going. It's kind of been going slow a little bit, I feel like.
Okay. All right. We'll work on that later. Not in front of the people. Jeez.
Show you how the sausage is made. Yeah. Well, like, you know, the sausage factory.
Oh.
What were you thinking?
I wasn't thinking about anything.
Okay. That's gonna get. Yeah, this is going out live. So
All right.
yeah. Well, we're gonna do. So what's coming up next? We're gonna do a little more streaming now. We're still not sticking to that schedule. We got to do that 8 o'clock, 7:30.
Working on it.
We're working on it.
We're working on it. Let's just try to do daily stream first, and then maybe we'll do a regular time.
Yeah, exactly.
Baby steps.
Exactly. I'm gonna definitely do a review of that book, though, The Aladdin Factor. I really liked it. I'm listening to it now, and I'm really enjoying it.
Very good. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. Drop the little.
We're dropping this again before we sign out.
Gets old. Gets old. I love it. I love it. Well, okay. All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Remember to ask for what you want.
Yeah.
Or else you don't get it.
Yeah. You got to ask if you want it.